Okay, so let's get right into this. For context, I'm a petite, soft-spoken 19-year-old girl and was taking summer classes at community college this summer. One of the classes I had to take was public speaking, which met on every Tuesday and Thursday. This guy, who I still don't even know his name, was immediately one of those kids. You know, angry young man who makes no effort in school and blasts Limp Bizkit as loud as he can. And yes, he really did do this. To get to our classroom that was on the second floor, you had to go down a hallway, down a stairwell to the first floor, out through the main lobby, and through the sliding doors. I noticed at one point he had started waiting for me after class and following me all the way down this route to my car. It didn't matter if I pretended to be on the phone, had both earbuds in, kept my head way down, or literally even power walked away from him. He would just wait there for me and always follow me and try to walk with me, even if I would give him bare minimum responses. The whole time he would be talking to me and attempting to ask me questions. Lots of stuff like asking about each of the cars I drove to school, since my family had to share them all. Even after I subtly dropped that I had a boyfriend, he still didn't stop. At this point, he definitely knew which car would be mine. After a while of this happening, I got a very bad feeling suddenly, and told the class professor what this kid had been doing. She immediately took it seriously, thankfully. She notified campus security, and told me to always stay extra after class, so she could walk to my car with me. True to form, as soon as she started doing this, the guy stopped showing up to class altogether, for at least 2 or so weeks. I thought it would be fine and the crisis was now averted. And it was, until one day he showed up to class again. As soon as I saw him enter the room, my heart dropped. During the class, I slipped a note to my professor, telling her he was the kid in the blue shirt. She told me to stick around after class that day. I did. And so did the guy and another female student. Before he tried to talk to the professor about why he should pass the class despite never even showing up or doing any work, the professor asked me and the other girl to step outside and wait in the hall. Even from all the way out there, though, we could hear him screaming and yelling so aggressively at the professor. He eventually did leave and came out into the hallway we were waiting in. He simply pointed at me and said, "You wait for me." Mind you, I still had no idea who this kid even was. I instantly got the heebie-jeebies and rushed back into the room to tell the professor, who was now equally creeped out. Having overheard this entire thing, the other female student came back into the room 10 minutes later. She told me and the professor that the guy was waiting just outside of the view of the hallway, standing there waiting for me. The professor called campus security multiple times and phoned the front desk as well, but she received no response. This meant we'd have to take things into our own hands. We came up with a plan to all leave the classroom together, pretending to be in very deep conversation with each other. We'd walk past the guy without even looking at him and walk down the stairwell to the main lobby. I could feel his eyes boring into us as we passed him by, and when we entered the stairwell, he stood up and followed behind us. The professor and I exchanged looks of terror but kept our cool act up, stopping at the main desk in the lobby and pretending to converse with the secretary. The guy passed us by, still staring at us, and walked out the sliding doors until he was out of our field of vision. We then had to go track down campus security ourselves and tell them everything that had happened. My professor was furious. After we saw security camera footage of him lurking around still, she contacted local police. She and I both had a very, very strong gut feeling this kid was not right, and we would not be safe around him. That public speaking class was from 3 to 5 p.m. I also had another class though from 6 to 8. I would occasionally drive to Wawa or something in that hour-long gap. However, there was no way in hell I was going anywhere now. I knew the guy was waiting for me to do so. For the better part of an hour, me, my professor, security, and the secretary all tried to figure out just who the hell this guy was. None of us knew his name, because he literally would never come to class. There weren't photo IDs next to the class roster either. Half the original class had eventually stopped showing up, so it's not like we could just use process of elimination. All we had was security camera footage of him. I was escorted to and from my next class and to my car at the end of the night. The security officer asked me to point out my car. When I did, he said, "Oh wow, so he was parked right next to you?" Confused, I asked what he meant. He told me he had been watching more security footage, and the guy got into the car parked right next to me and waited there for a long time before he eventually left. The thing is, I knew for a fact I had not parked next to anyone when I arrived to the school. The lot was practically empty since it was summertime. After finally getting home that night, I was the only person home for a few weeks, go figure. Local police did drive-bys of my home all night and a well check as well. When I returned to the school 2 days later for my Thursday classes, I was informed of some very chilling information. The footage showed him waiting for me in his car on Tuesday after our shared class, which I had already been told, but it also showed him coming back to the parking lot at 8 p.m., just when my last class got out, and sitting in his car right next to mine. Mind you, I had never told him about my schedule or any other classes I could possibly be taking. This whole time, my public speaking professor was filing reports, making complaints against the school for their incompetency, and even got a lawyer. She felt so uneasy about this kid that if he showed up again, she would just walk out. I was in contact with the president of the entire college, the director of security, police, etc. for days. They told me he was banned from campus now, and everyone was on watch for him. If he was spotted, he would be immediately asked to leave. Until the director of campus security, a middle-aged man, called me and told me he had identified the kid and talked to him as well. He told me the guy had said, and I quote, "I just wanted to be your friend." He told me whatever I was doing with the guy, literally running away from him every time, probably made him think I was flirting with him. My professors were absolutely furious and excused me from physically attending class for the rest of the semester. I'm still on edge all the time though, knowing that this guy knows what cars I drive and for all I know could have even followed me home without me knowing. I still don't even know his name, and I hope I will never have to learn it. This happened a couple of years ago, when I was a senior in high school living in Southern California. It was later in the evening, sometime between 8 or 8:30 I believe. My mom and I had just gotten home from a long day of driving and visiting family to discover that our cat was now completely out of food. I was tired of being in the car by then and I didn't really want to go to Petco to get the cat food, but my mom begged me to go with her. Finally, after a bunch of convincing, I caved in and said yes. Looking back now though, I'm extremely grateful that I went, because if I hadn't decided to go with her, I think there's a good chance my mom would have never come home that night. An important detail that I want to mention first is that the windows on the car my mom had were extremely tinted, making it pretty much impossible to see inside. We pull into the parking lot of Petco and I look around. I notice there's only a few other cars there, with one parked a few rows to the back of us. My mom said to wait in the car since she was going in real quick to pick up the food. A minute after my mom walked away and was about halfway to the store, the car that was parked a few rows back pulled into the spot right next to ours on the passenger side. Of course, I thought this was a little bit strange, but maybe the person just wanted a closer spot to the store. I then saw a man step out of the car, grab his big German Shepherd out of the back, and walk into the store as well. As I glanced over inside the store, I noticed this guy was now watching my mom and following her around. Not enough for her to notice though. He got ahead of her in line, and after he checked out, he stood right outside the entrance, waiting for her to check out as well. When my mom walked out of the store, the guy began to walk silently behind her. At this point, I was getting a very bad feeling. I was very creeped out as well. When my mom made it back to our car finally, she opened the back to put the cat food in. The guy opened the back of his car right next to ours and started talking to her and motioning for her to come look at something in the back of his car. My mom, being completely oblivious, took a few steps towards him and was now looking into the back. His hands started to move towards his waist, and I immediately started yelling for her to get into our car right now. The man was super alarmed. I'm guessing he'd never seen me in the car because of the tinted windows. He stopped talking to her right away. My mom looked extremely confused, but after I yelled at her some more to get in, she finally did. The creepy guy took another double take at our car and immediately hopped into his and drove off in a hurry. When my mom hopped into the car as well, I asked her what that guy was saying to her. She told me he was telling her to look at something he got for his dog that was in the back of his car. I told her everything I observed and that I was pretty sure he was trying to abduct her from the parking lot. It was quite a startling and eye-opening experience for her. I lived in Japan for around 10 months a couple of years back as part of a study abroad program as my placement year for university. I lived in Hiroshima, and pretty much every Japanese person I met was exactly how you would expect them to be. Very generous, very respectful as well. All of them except this one old lady who just so happened to live in the apartment right next to mine. It was about a month after I'd been in Japan. I'm originally from Northern Ireland, so it was quite an adjustment for me to make. When our group of gaijins decided we were going to go to the Saijo Sake Festival. For those who don't know, this is a huge sake, rice wine, drinking festival that from what I now understand everyone goes and gets extremely smashed at. As men of fine taste and culture, we sampled many different kinds of sake from all over Japan and got rode off beyond belief. We all filed onto the train home back to our apartments. I can't remember shit all apart from calling my girlfriend at the time and passing out on my futon. Normal stuff, really. Skipped to 6 a.m. the next morning, though, when my loud as fuck doorbell woke me up. Keep in mind my apartment was extremely small, so the noise reverberated loudly. I checked the time and was confused as all get out, but I assumed it was just my friend from downstairs who wanted to talk about last night or something. I looked through the peephole in my door only to see a police officer standing right there. First thought that goes through my mind is, Taylor, what the fuck have you done when you were drunk last night? At the same time though, I was so sure I'd just fallen asleep right away. I talked to the dude using a translation app. He basically told me there'd been a noise complaint. Strange, considering the fact that all I did was make a single phone call and fall asleep. Anyway, the guy saw how confused I was and kinda saw there must have been a mistake. He left without much trouble. Honestly, I was still a bit drunk and super confused, but the day carried on from then as normal. Next morning, 6 a.m., the doorbell rings once more. I kind of assumed already what it was gonna be this time. What do I see through the peephole when I look? Now there are 2 officers. The same convo went down and I convinced them there really was no noise. I literally walked them through my apartment to show them how I'd fallen asleep watching Netflix. They told me at this point it was the neighbor, who I'd never met before, making all these complaints. At this point I really thought she was just a bitch or maybe a bit of a racist. I asked the guy at my uni who takes care of all the foreign students about this. He told me I was getting moved to a room on the floor below. I was honestly pretty pissed because I just settled into my new place. But whatever, this kind of stuff happens, you know. He planned on coming tomorrow morning with the landlord to move my shit out and check that my new room was okay. Has it ever happened to you when you suddenly get woken up by something in the middle of the night and it really fucks you up? I went to sleep at a good time that night to prepare for the people helping move my stuff out early. So naturally, at 3 a.m. I was fast asleep, when suddenly my doorbell began constantly ringing like crazy. It was absolutely deafening, and of course it woke me up straight away. I can't even begin to tell you how scared I was of this sudden noise. I couldn't even move. I didn't know what to do. After about a minute of what felt like incessant noise, there was complete silence suddenly. I made my way over to the front door to look through the peephole. I saw nothing, but I just knew it was that psycho bitch of a neighbor. Nothing else happened that night, thankfully, and eventually I did manage to get back to sleep. I woke up the next morning still kinda shaken up. It's cool though, my boys are coming around soon. I kept walking out the front to check if they're downstairs and quickly closing the door behind me because I didn't know what this woman would try if she saw me. I walked into my room and slid the door to my balcony open. This is where I see her for the first time. She had literally wrapped her body around the fence that separated our balconies while keeping her footing on her side. She was just standing there, staring right at me. We stared at each other for a second before she quickly whipped back around to the other side like something straight out of The Grudge. Literally 2 seconds later, my doorbell started ringing furiously. I was thinking to myself, that's not possible. This is some demon shit right here. I am so fucked. Thank God it turned out to be the people helping to move my stuff instead. I told them what was going on and hastily moved downstairs to my new room. She still shows up outside of my new room every once in a while. Thankfully though, I was mostly able to avoid interaction with her directly from then on out. I guess eventually, after all the false complaints, the police decided to start ignoring her calls as well. This past New Year's Eve, I went away for the night with my 2 best friends and one of their moms as well. I was home for the holidays from college, and my friend Sarah invited me to go to Palm Springs to celebrate New Year's with her mom and our friend Rachel. I didn't really have any other plans, so I decided it would be a good idea to go with them. We went to a really cool city about an hour from where we all live, that was very big on shopping and resorts as well. We planned to have a pretty calm night all in all. Watch the ball drop at a block party thing downtown, have a few drinks at the bar. Since we were on the West Coast, the ball drop was at 9 or so. This meant that about 8, we ventured out from our hotel, walking to the block party that was only about a mile away. On the way there, we passed by a very lively bar. We decided to stop by real quick. We spent about 15 minutes dancing, but didn't really get any drinks. It was a gay bar, and Sarah and Rachel being gay, they were pretty stoked on finding this place. They wanted to come back after the ball drop, even though it was about 90% men there. We continued on to the block party, got some dinner, grabbed a glass of champagne. The ball dropped and they had a DJ as well, so we spent about an hour there dancing with everyone. After we got pretty tired of this, we decided to head back to the bar and hang out there until about midnight or so. Once we got there, Sarah's mom paid for a drink for each of us, but left soon after that because she was really tired. It was about 10:30 at this point. Sarah, Rachel, and I are all enjoying our drinks and having a lot of fun dancing. Rachel then tried some of mine since it was one she had never had before. I constantly have my guard up drinking in public, and I felt safe at this bar because it was 90% gay men as well, who I thought would have no interest in me. I went back to the bar to get a second drink, and that's the very last thing I remember. The rest I've gathered from Sarah and Rachel. Almost immediately after grabbing that second drink, I asked Rachel to go to the bathroom with me because I was not feeling well at all, even though I had been completely fine just 10 minutes before this. Once in the bathroom, I collapsed on the floor and became almost unresponsive. Rachel was now extremely worried and somehow dragged my half-lifeless body out to where Sarah was waiting for us. Security, upon seeing my condition, assumed I was wasted and asked us to leave immediately. Sarah and Rachel decided to take me back to the hotel about a half-mile away. By this point, I was completely unconscious though, and there were barely any sounds escaping from my mouth. They saw someone leave the bar at the same time as us and began walking near all 3 of us, but they were too preoccupied with trying to keep my dead-weight, lifeless body off the ground. At one point, I even vomited all over everything, both of them, the sidewalk, etc. The next part of the story we had to get from Sarah, and Rachel doesn't have memory of this either. Still struggling to carry me, the man they saw leave the bar approached them. He was hitting on Rachel, trying to get her to go grab a drink with him. She was very agitated and told him to leave. Her friend needed help right now, obviously. He would not take no for an answer and followed us down the street. A middle-aged woman witnessed this and came up and told the man off, something along the lines of "Stop harassing these young women or I'll call the police." He basically ran away after that. Next, by some miracle, an EMT and his wife enjoying the holiday ran into us as well. He checked me out to make sure something wasn't majorly wrong, and then carried me the rest of the way to my hotel and into the room. My friends could barely even hold up my weight. They thanked the man profusely, and him and his wife left. This is where Rachel's memory suddenly kicks back in. Only 5 minutes later, they got a knock on the door. It's the EMT and his wife again. They'd come by to let us know that a man had followed us into the hotel. They'd just seen him hop over the gate and start making his way directly to our room. My friends called hotel security, but they were unable to find the guy in the end. My friends didn't get a good glimpse of him, but I'm 100% sure it was that same man from earlier. I spent the rest of the night vomiting everything in my body and dry heaving after that. I woke up the next morning in a pile of pillows and blankets on the bathroom floor. My very last memory was at the bar getting that second drink. My friends filled me in on everything that had happened. Feeling like crap, I thought I must have just drank way too much, but I had never blacked out before in my life, and the amount of drinks I'd had, 2 in 2 hours, didn't add up to me being completely knocked out like that. We decided my first drink had to have been drugged, and since Rachel had some of it, it affected her as well somewhat, even though she was still fully functional. I'm sure that man that was talking to Rachel and then followed us back was the one who had slipped something into my drink. To this day, I really don't know how that could have even happened though. I got my drink directly from the bar and never even set it down once. My guess was that it was already in the cup when I received it. Thankfully, I had a really good friend and lots of kind strangers protecting me that night, but it still keeps me up at night, thinking what could have happened under different circumstances. So this was back in January of 2018. It took me a few years and a little bit of therapy to even be able to talk about this. I'm okay now though, so I thought I would share this. It's a little bit long, but buckle up. I was part of a study abroad program in Bangkok, which was awesome for the record. Not long after being there, my fellow students and I went out for a night on the town. After a night of a bit of drinking and running amok in Bangkok, we somehow ended up in this back alley illegal strip club. Here's where I think it's important to mention that I'm female, and I was the only female in the group that night. I saw things I will never unsee in the 15 minutes we were there, and it honestly keeps me up at night every once in a while. Let's just say it was pretty blatantly obvious the woman did not want to be there. Very quickly, I also did not want to be there. About 5 minutes into this really misguided decision, I realized 2 guys from my group were talking to a guy in a red polo shirt. Oh man, there were many guys in red polo shirts scattered throughout the room, and none of them looked very pleasant to be around. One of my friends, let's call him M, came back over to me laughing, pointed back at the red shirt guy, and said, "Hey, he's trying to get me to sell you to him for $10 American. I keep telling him you're worth more, but 10 is the highest he says he'll go." I've never noped out of a situation so fast in my entire life, and everyone went with me. I'm an experienced traveler, so I did take the opportunity to use this as a learning experience for M. I taught him how quickly these situations can go south, and how important it is to be on your guard always in a foreign country. I thought he'd learned his lesson. We'd all gotten out safe, so no harm, no foul. I'll admit though that after that I did become a little more withdrawn from the group. Everyone would go out partying every single night. I went to school, occasionally ate out, and did some daytime shopping at the markets, or maybe hung out in a high-end spa near the hotel. For like $20 to $50 American, you can get pampered like a queen, and a broke college kid, of course, took advantage of that. 2 other girls joined me on my adventures, and we had a pretty great time overall, actually. Before we were scheduled to return back to the States, my other classmates, okay, it was all M, finally convinced me to go out for a night on the town with them to some strip. People were eating scorpions on a stick. Some dumb girl from Australia who had joined our group took a hit of some gas they were selling on the street and vomited everywhere, and people were packed elbow to elbow. There was a lot of rave-style lights and music. Big sensory overload. I figured I was with a group of 20 people from the US and Australia. If there was a time to drink and party in a foreign country, this would be it. So the drinking started, and the partying began. With drinking, of course, eventually comes the need for a restroom as well. I told M I was going to find one, and I would be right back. M chose that moment to be a diva though, starting to hammer back drinks and demanding everyone's attention. I must have been gone 10 minutes tops. I come back and everyone is gone. I got the story later that the Aussies left and the rest of my group had to chase down M when he ran off in a drunken display for attention. I walk over to the entrance of this strip where we all dropped off and sit down on a picnic table near all the cabs to wait for my group. An hour goes by, 2 hours, 2.5 hours goes by. It's almost 1 a.m. now. The street is still packed, but I've seen not one single person from my group. I was starting to get a little bit concerned. I realized I had no idea where we were really. The others had been coming to the strip every night, but this was my first time. Fuck. Okay, experienced traveler time. I didn't have the address to the hotel written down in English or in Thai, and I don't speak Thai either. Luckily, I hadn't had a drink in 2.5 hours, so I was getting pretty sober at this point. I had been there long enough to know that taking a tuk-tuk, those open wheelie cab things, were much cheaper than taking an actual cab. I had not been there long enough though to realize that taking a tuk-tuk at 1 a.m. alone as a female was a very bad idea. I showed the driver my room key to tell him where I needed to go. What a naive child I was. We negotiated a price and I hopped in. He started going the opposite direction from where our cab came in from to drop us off initially. We took a highway to get there, but my tuk-tuk driver was on all residential streets. Then he wandered into an alley. Okay, I was on red alert right now. He stopped. I poised, ready to strike should I need to. Next to me on my left, a garage door rolled up, and a group of men walked out, one of who was holding a blue purse. I stuck around just long enough to see him start walking over and unzipping said purse as he moved. I bolted. I barely managed to shake off the tuk-tuk driver. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, crying because I couldn't breathe. I thought to myself I was going to die because I could never be bothered to go to a gym. I kept running and running until finally I saw it. The familiarity of home. A 7-Eleven in the middle of this Thai neighborhood. I was hysterical as I sprinted through that door like the Kool-Aid man himself. The cashier started yelling at me to get out in Thai. I was desperately yelling in English that my tuk-tuk driver had just tried to sell me, and I was not going anywhere. We go at it for a minute or two of me begging him to help me, when this tiny little 4-foot elderly Thai woman came up to me with an equally tiny grocery cart full of 2-liter bottles of Pepsi. She took my hand and my room key. She never said a single word to me, not one. She led me outside, hailed a cab, and had a solid 60-second conversation with the driver, then pushed me into the back seat. The scariest part of my entire night, though, was that 15-minute cab ride back to my hotel. I couldn't possibly know if that little Thai woman had just helped me or sold me out to the highest bidder. The cab driver had to stop and ask for directions about 3 minutes from the hotel, so that was probably the moment I knew this was going to affect me mentally for a while. The ride cost me 10 American, and I tipped him $60. You know, for not trying to sell me as a slave.
Good evening all, and welcome. Is there someone behind you? Oh, silly me. It's just a figment of my imagination. Or is it? Tonight we're delving into the creepy world of stalkers. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I went to a fairly large middle school that had kids from at least 3 cities in the area all going to it. From there, I went to a small high school with maybe 300 kids in total. My high school was a highly competitive charter school located in the mountains and surrounded by several acres of woods. I met this guy, Sam, in middle school, but didn't really interact with him much. It was more of one of those friend of my friends things. Fast forward to my sophomore year of high school. Sam transfers into my high school, and my high school did some block schedules. So we had 4 classes and a sort of study hall / homeroom class in the middle of the day. Sam transferred partway through sophomore year, and I didn't know how this happened, but he ended up in 4 out of my 5 classes, counting homeroom / study hall. At this time, I had established a bit of a reputation at the school for being helpful and a good student. So when Sam transferred and seemed to be having a tough time, I was asked to take him under my wing and help him out. Boy, do I regret doing that. One of the classes we had together was a history class that I also had with one of my best friends. Despite her protests, my teacher made the 2 of us work with Sam on all our group projects. Sam was already kind of creepy with me, even though he has been at our school for less than a week. When we started working together, he would sit uncomfortably close to me, and at first he wouldn't say much, but as he got more and more courage, he began talking to me. At first, it was all normal stuff. I had an older boyfriend at the time who was in the Air Force and stationed in Japan. I know that sounds like one of those lies high school girls make up to get creepy guys to back up, but this was true. We were childhood friends and had began dating shortly before he enlisted, so I made sure Sam knew I wasn't looking for anything more than a friend. But it didn't take long before he started flirting with me. His flirting quickly escalated from compliments to asking if my boyfriend Alex was real, to trying to steal the purity ring I wore every day on my finger, and joking that one day it wouldn't be just the ring he was stealing. I was freaked out, but I figured there wasn't much he could do since we only saw each other at school, and he didn't know where I lived. Back when I was in high school, the chat that's a part of Gmail now called Google Hangouts was like the AIM messenger of the time, so everyone used it, and there were several group chats that I was a part of for my school that used personal email addresses rather than our school Gmails. Through this, Sam got my email address. He started sending me creepy, explicit emails about the things he dreamt about. I won't share the one I have saved, but they were gross, especially to a Christian virgin girl. He often had some part about me moaning how I loved him, not Alex, over and over again. Eventually it got so bad that one of my friends reported what was happening to school administration. They basically sent out an email to the entire school administration that Sam wasn't allowed to communicate with me at school. This freed me from everything but the creepy emails that came in on a weekly basis, at least until the end of the year. Junior year, Sam was keeping his distance, but we had a class together, so we had started interacting at a minimal level. I mostly just ignored him, and hung out with my friends though. Senior year is when things started getting really bad again, and I didn't realize how bad they had actually been in my junior year until this point. We both took advanced martial arts as an elective class that year, which meant not only did we have to talk, we actually had to spar and train together. The worst thing about this is that my high school gym was a 3 to 5 minute walk from the rest of our campus, and you had to walk through a trail through the woods that I mentioned earlier to get back there. Sam would wait for me every morning at the top of the trail before school, and at the bottom of the trail after class, just so that he could walk with me. Although he usually walked a good 5 feet behind me and didn't talk to me. At this point, my long-distance relationship was beginning to fall apart, and Sam saw this as his opportunity. He started telling me stuff about how I was his soulmate, and I just didn't want to see it. He also told me that he had drawn some kind of rune that eternally bound our souls. Don't ask me what that means. Sam was into all sorts of Wicca, dreamwalking, and other magic stuff that I wrote off as stupid jokes. As we came up on the end of our senior year, some of my teachers started asking me about essays, short stories, and poems that I had written and turned in during earlier years. I eventually found out that Sam had been taking my old writing out of the trash at the end of each year when I cleaned out my locker, and thrown out all those old assignments I no longer cared about, and was turning them back in as his own work. I insisted I knew nothing about it, and my school decided to search his locker. The thing was like a crazy shrine to me. He had piles of my old homework and assignments that I had thrown out, and 4 or 5 composition notebooks that I used to keep as diaries and poetry journals that I assumed I had just lost at some point. The school assumed he was simply keeping my work in hopes of turning it back in and getting better grades so that he could actually graduate, but it felt really creepy to me. The school took all of my old work and made me take it home and suggested I not throw out assignments away at school, or I would get into trouble for letting him copy me. The thing is, the other thing they found in his locker that they didn't care about, but I did, was several word magnets that my friend and I had made to leave notes in each other's lockers. I know they were the ones out of my locker, which meant he also knew my combination. A few weeks after they raided his locker, I was getting changed back into my regular clothes after my martial arts class, and discovered that my bra and my extra workout shirt were missing from my locker. I reported it to the school, but nothing ever came of that. I'm fairly sure Sam stole them, but I've never been able to prove it. After that, he stopped talking to me for the most part. I had a new boyfriend who actually went to our school for the last 2 months of senior year, and Sam was terrified of him. The only thing that happened was that one of the composition notebooks I had, completely filled with quotes and poems, went missing, and occasionally the magnets and other things in my locker seemed to magically rearrange themselves in ways that didn't make sense. Some of my friends knew my combination, and although they swore they'd never touch my stuff, I just figured it was them trying to be funny. After graduation, I figured that I was finally free of Sam, but instead, he began to stalk me more closely. At first, it was just emails from accounts I didn't recognize, asking for things that didn't make sense. I marked these as spam and ignored them. Then he made an account under the same name of one of my former friends from high school. I thought it was actually my friend Becca emailing me, so I responded. We carried on a pretty normal email conversation for a few weeks, and then she got weird. She and I had talked about our relationship and things like that, so she knew I had a boyfriend. She started asking me to send her nudes, and insisting that if I didn't, she would hurt herself or try to end her life. She used to send me pictures of the deep cuts on her arm, or even counted the pills she took when I refused to do what she asked. Becca had told me she was living somewhere in Colorado, so I was pretty sure I couldn't call anyone and say someone I knew was threatening to do what they were doing. I'm not proud of what I did, or that I fell for Sam's games, but I did what I was told for fear of being responsible for someone's death. This went on for several months until I finally got tired of it and actually deleted my email address. Things were quiet from there as I started my first year of college. However, I soon found out from a friend of mine that Sam was attending the community college, which is within walking distance of the one I was attending. I didn't think Sam knew where I was, so I figured I'd be fine, and I was for about the first month. Sam started showing up outside my classes. At first, he would just stand there in the sea of people leaving my class until he knew I saw him. Then he would walk away. This started to really freak me out, and at the time I had no friends at the college and no boyfriend to intimidate Sam. After a few weeks, I started getting emails to my college email address. They always came from different email addresses and had no subject, and always had 4 attachments. They were always me somewhere on campus, eating, in class, heading to my car, even photos of me heading into the bathroom. I reported everything to campus police, but they told me that unless I could prove who was doing this, there wasn't much they could do about it. I established the habit of getting on and off campus as quickly as possible, and not talking or interacting with anyone. After my first semester and Christmas break, things calmed back down for a while, and I started trying to make friends, which turned out to be a big mistake. I had started working in a store in my local mall, and I hadn't heard from Sam or Becca in several months. Sam started showing up at my work that January. I worked in a home decor store, so the store had pretty narrow walkways between the displays, and it was next to impossible to notice someone coming up behind you, and the cameras in half the store were dead. At first, he would just wander around, and if I was working, he might do something like break something in my section of the store. One of my co-workers actually saw him do it a few times. I worked on a rotating schedule, so I worked different times and different days every week, so he couldn't just wait for me to show up. If he went to the store and I wasn't there, he would ask when I was working, claiming to be my boyfriend. After 2 or 3 times of my managers and co-workers asking me why my boyfriend had come in asking for my schedule, did I find out it was Sam. I explained the situation to my managers, and they let everyone know that if Sam showed up while I was working, they had to alert the manager and me, so that I could stay in the back. They were also told to tell Sam that I no longer worked there, in hopes that he would stop. It took my manager threatening to call mall security for him to finally stop coming to my work. After that, he went quiet again for almost a year, before popping up on my social media again last year. He claimed that he had changed and that he wanted a second chance. Me, being the stupid person that I am, and always wanting to give people the benefit of the doubt, and only seeing the best in people, started to rebuild a friendship with him. At this point, I was actually single, but was trying to build a friendship with this guy that I had a thing for a very long time, who is now my fiancé. It was only a week into us talking before he started being creepy again, and begging for nudes, and sending me messages like the emails he used to send me in high school. My now fiancé, then my best friend, although he asked me out within a few weeks of this, signed into my account on Snapchat and basically ranted at this guy, telling him to leave his girlfriend alone, and the next inappropriate message he sent me would mean my boyfriend immediately blocked his account and he would never speak to me again. After that, I tried to put some distance between us, although I tried to be friendly and answer when he talked to me. After a few months of this, Becca made a reappearance. She started talking to me on Instagram as someone completely different. We spoke for a few weeks before she started sending me messages that made it clear it really was Sam. My fiance and I have a theory that Sam decided to bring Becca back as a way to attempt to make me dependent on Sam again. She went back to her old tricks of the self-harm and the threats. Except this time, Sam used the timed photo thing on Instagram and his little sister to really add a punch to it to make me truly believe she was trying to hurt herself. I told her that I knew who she was and that she was lying. She threatened to blackmail me with old images I had sent her way back in my first year of college if I didn't send her more. Instead, I told my boyfriend, and he used his tech nerdiness to check out the metadata on her photos and discovered that they were screenshots from some other account and that this person actually lived in the same state as us. We reported Becca to both Instagram and our local police, and spoke to a lawyer friend of mine about the things she said, and then blocked both Becca and Sam. The only thing that's happened since then is that a few accounts have popped up on Facebook and Whisper using my images, both the appropriate and explicit ones, and claiming to be me. My fiance has a search algorithm set up to find them, although as soon as one comes up, it's down before either of us get a chance to report it. It doesn't happen consistently, and entire months go by between incidences, but honestly, I wish it would just stop already. Sam, please, leave me alone, and let's never meet again. When I was 13, I moved from my hometown in Tennessee to a whole new place in northern Michigan. There, I met my best friend Lena. Anyway, she's like my twin sister. That's what we call ourselves. Lena has two younger sisters, Katie and Marina. Lena and I had a friend called Bear. We also had a friend who I would later date named Ronnie. Ronnie and Bear knew a girl called Mandy, who is the antagonist of this story. We met Mandy in high school our freshman year. She's 17, we're 14. No big deal. Most of us hang out with older kids anyway. She was a little annoying, but we dealt with it because Bear had a crush on Mandy's older brother. So the stalking wasn't really starting at first. Mainly, she was annoying and tried to tag along with us for everything, and was mostly just generally a nuisance. She had a class with Lena, and most often would hang out around her before and after. Eventually, Mandy began to crave Lena's attention. She would tug on Lena's hair in class when she was talking to our other friends, be very loud and aggressive towards them when she was told to hold on, and shoved herself into Lena's personal space. She would take pictures of Bear, Ronnie, Lena and I, and anyone else who she knew, and post them all over the internet. Ronnie had explicitly stated that he didn't want pictures of himself on the web, but she posted them anyway. She went as far as to use the pictures she had taken of them without their knowledge and posted them without her consent as her Facebook profile picture. She went to Bear's apartment one day and ended up giving her a ring. Her parents got angry for I can only guess why, and Mandy decided to lie and tell them that Bear had stolen the ring from her. She then told them that Bear had lost it. This got Bear into deeper trouble with Mandy's parents, despite it not being true. They later learned it wasn't the case, as they found out Mandy was stealing money from them constantly. Mandy started getting worse and worse. I confronted her about her physical abuse towards Lena, and told her to either leave her alone completely or stop being so irritating, and told her that I would personally kick her if I heard she had been physically harming her again. And for a while, it stopped. She began showing up to places we were going and forcing herself into the group. One very important example of this was a birthday party Lena had. She was turning 15, and it was a cosplay party. She showed up unannounced and uninvited to Lena's home in a Halloween costume, feigning ignorance when we told her she'd not been invited and she wasn't allowed to be at Lena's home. She showed up to Ronnie's house while he was alone, prompted me to get rather angry as she had a crush on him, and she claimed she knew I was dating him at the time. Ronnie told her to leave, and she said he didn't want anything romantic from her at all because he had a girlfriend. She didn't leave until Ronnie's mum came home and threatened to call the police. A fun tidbit about this is that Ronnie had no neighbours for miles. He lived on farmland miles outside of the nearest city. Hell, he lived miles from me, and I was at least 10 minutes from the city. She had to have intentionally showed up, and she was obviously not popping in while in the area. Things seemed to calm down once I moved again. I had long since broken things off with Ronnie, and we remained friends for a good while. I heard less and less about Mandy, until I wondered if anything had even happened. It was finally seemingly over. About a year ago, I was asked by Lena if I remembered Mandy. I told that I did, of course, and I asked why. She then dropped a bomb on me. Lena was a Christian for a while when I knew her. She'd been raised Baptist, and she and her siblings attended a youth group at the church that we had gone to, and I went with them to make them happy despite the fact I'm Jewish. We were all pretty close with the youth pastor and youth leaders, so I was surprised to hear that they'd stopped going weeks prior. You see, Mandy had been waiting every week at the youth group to see Marina, waiting to ask her out. Mandy, who was now 20 years old, was waiting on a weekly basis to see Marina, who was 12, to ask her on a date. A 20-year-old woman was trying desperately to ask out a 12-year-old girl who wasn't really old enough to know if she even liked anyone, let alone if she was gay or bisexual. I was beyond furious. I was seeing red, then messaged Mandy as she was still in my contacts. She became immediately defensive, asking me over and over who told her and why I wanted to know. Now for the past few years I've been studying abnormal psychological forensics and criminology to prepare for college and university when I go. This defensive behavior, especially in Mandy, showed me that she was guilty. I didn't answer past, someone told me and I need to know. Shockingly, she told me the truth, said it was true, but that she was done with it now and she had a boyfriend. This made me feel physically ill. I asked how old he was and she told me he was 16. The worst part about everything is, in my eyes, trying to ask out a 12-year-old girl when she was 20. That is the absolute most sickening thing about it all, and I feel ill just remembering this. Mandy, for your own sake, let's not meet. God only knows what I'd say or do to you if I ever did. In 1988, I quit my job as a teacher in San Francisco and moved back with my parents in East Sacramento, in their guest house. It was a nice little cabin type with a small sitting area near the kitchenette, and the sound of shrubbery near my bedroom was relaxing. During the summer, I was taking a refresher course in alternative teaching methods in a nearby town called Rancho Cordova, and I was there for most hours of the morning from 9 till 12, and I would take the bus home. It was a really nice place to live, and the houses were beautiful. Who wouldn't want to live there? Not me. When I'd walk through Sacramento, I'd imagine walking through the busy streets of the hate. I had to be there, so I had no other choice, and the teaching job I was doing to have at Folsom Middle School seemed promising. On a sunny afternoon, I walked home from the bus stop and noticed the neighbor's son, at only 10, was sitting on the parents' lawn. I asked him if he was okay, and he looked at me dazed. "There's a man looking in your window," he said. I thought maybe he'd seen my dad, and that was it. I asked him to carry my books while I unlocked the door, and told him it was probably my father. "No, he was looking from the outside," he said, once again thinking he was just a kid with an imagination. What did he look like? He said it was a man wearing a black mask like the Hamburglar. This was California, and David had never seen snow, so it's likely he'd never seen a ski mask, and it sounded like that was what he was describing. For a second I considered reporting it, but it was only the basis of a child who said a man who looked like the Hamburglar was looking in my parents' living room window. I let him inside, let him have a soda, and walked him across the street. The rest of the afternoon I sat on the patio of the guest house, smoking cigarettes and reading Stephen King. I lifted my head up to take a sip from my Coke when I saw a shadow duck behind the garden shed. It was almost like at the moment when Annie and Laurie are walking home in Halloween, and the shape hides behind the hedges. Almost like that. Cigarette in hand, I walk over to the garden shed slowly. "David, if that's you, go home." I looked behind and there was no one there, but beside it there were 2 footprints where someone wearing heavy boots was standing. I was freaked, but it could have easily been anybody, even the neighbor. I went inside and put on a record really loud, leaving the window open and sitting back on the patio reading my book. I thought if there was someone creeping about, maybe playing music would scare them to thinking someone was home. A knot was tightening in my stomach, and the more I thought about it, the more I was tempted to look up from my page to see if the shadow would jump out from behind the shed once more. I grew up there and never felt like East Sacramento was a place for prowlers. It seemed too much of a sunshine land for that. I blew the thought off and decided to pick the needle up, turn the stereo off, lock up, and go to an old friend's house until my parents returned home. I went to my cousin Cindy's house. She'd just married her boyfriend straight out of high school. Cindy was a kindred spirit and would go on to marry 4 more times by 1999 before she had her first son. "Call the police, that's what I'd do," she said, rinsing her hair in the sink. She just finished coloring it with food dye. Her husband, Brad, at the time, offered to go over there before he had to go to work at the video store. Brad wasn't butch or strong, but he pretended he was. I felt stupid. A grown-ass adult that was too scared to go home because the bogeyman was hiding in the garden shed. "That place always gave me the creeps. It's dark. There's spiders," Cindy laughed. "But we never thought there was someone in there," I replied to her. I called my mother at her prayer group and she came to pick me up. I felt even more pathetic than I did before. I told her what I'd seen and what David said. She said that I was scaring myself and to not be silly. She laughed, and I thought perhaps she was right. That was until I came home to find the kitchenette window in the guest house had its screen taken off, put neatly against the wall. Nothing had been taken, but things had been moved. Odd things. Some records were pulled slightly off the shelf. A picture of an old friend had been placed face down, and there was an empty beer can in my trash can. I don't drink, and some of the food in my fridge had been eaten. My degree was now on a different hook. Either some jackass broke into my house to move some stuff and have lunch, or I was going crazy. After this, I started getting obscene phone calls like heavy breathing and whispers that I couldn't understand. I asked the police what to do, and they told me to put in new locks on the doors and call my phone company to change my number. When I asked them if there was something they could do, they said they couldn't because I had no evidence these things were related and nothing was stolen. I prepared to move and decided I wasn't going to wait around to be the victim of crime. One afternoon I'd come home from work to hear the phone ringing. I dropped my student's work on the outside chair and quickly unlocked the door, picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" There was nothing. "Hello, anybody there?" They were calling me a whore in this high-pitched whisper. I'd had enough. I moved that weekend in with my cousin Cindy until I could find somewhere else. My parents never experienced the phone calls and never found their things misplaced. For some time I considered it was a student I gave a bad grade, or someone following me home. I'd like to know who it was. It'll eat me alive otherwise. I've gone on long enough without knowing, and maybe I will never know. One night in November of 2017, I was 22 years old. My mum and I went grocery shopping. While standing in the bakery section, my mum and I ran into my aunt, and the three of us stood there and chit-chatted for a while. I'd been feeling generally uneasy around this time because I had recently been binge-watching a lot of YouTube videos about true crime and creepy encounters. I was having trouble sleeping, as I had been getting scared when I was home alone, and heard the tiniest noise. Due to this unease or paranoia, I was very alert and on edge in the bakery at the grocery store. I stood with my back to the bagels and kept an eye on everyone walking past us as my mum and aunt shared stories. Nobody seemed suspicious until I caught the sight of a prematurely balding man. He looked like your average mid-30s, brawny neckbeard nice guy. I remember thinking to myself, God, he's kind of creepy looking, isn't he? As he walked through the produce section in the bakery. But then I started to feel bad. Chill out, you're being way too judgmental, I told myself, going so far as to even smile to him out of sheer guilt. He's probably staring at you because you're staring at him. He's just glancing his way by. He's gonna forget about you the second he takes his eye off you. Right? Wrong. I completely forgot about this experience for just a few blissful, ignorant months. Then in January, I received a messenger request from an old friend I'd lost touch with. My long-lost friend was the first of many to reach out, saying there was a lot of buzz on Facebook about a local sex offender who had been taking pictures of young women with hair he deemed pretty, some in their 20s like me, some well below the age of 18, and posting them on a picture-sharing site. I don't know exactly how, but his online albums was stocked with, and I'm not exaggerating, thousands of these pictures. He had been found out, and a bunch of screenshots were being plastered all over Facebook to raise awareness. My old friend saw a few pictures of me standing against the bagels flanked by my mother and aunt, my long hair hanging down in post-French braid waves. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw the screenshots. I told my family about what I just found out, and my brother immediately called the police to report it. As he was talking to an officer, I received more screenshots, this time of the creep's registry page. He was the man from the grocery store, the man I was initially unnerved by, the man I felt guilty about, the man that I smiled at. When my brother got off the phone with the police, he told us that they had been flooded with reports all night. While sympathetic, the policeman my brother spoke to said there was nothing they could do, as the creep was legally within his rights to take those pictures of us out in public. The man was allegedly assaulted outside of a convenience store the night his pictures were discovered, before he even realized he had been exposed, and he has since been arrested for possession of indecent images of children in an unrelated case. Fun fact, my brother had actually been aware of this guy long before, as he was apparently infamous on the net for being a sketchy white dude who was obsessed with Asian women, had a hair fetish, and oh yes, was a convicted offender. So as they say, creepy photographer, let's not meet. When I was still in high school, I was crossing a bridge to go to school, and this very friendly man stopped me and asked me to fill up a survey about budgeting. I was like, okay, sure, and when I was done, he told me to fill out my contact details and gave reasons, like how he's a social worker, and of course I gave him my number. I was so dumb, but at the very least I was smart enough to give him a fake name. In 2016, I began to receive random messages from this guy and was getting super creeped out by it. He knew which school I went to because I was wearing my uniform then, and was starting to ask personal questions. I tried to avoid them all and generally didn't reply to him, but he kept texting me, albeit infrequently, maybe a message a day. And when he wished me a happy Valentine's Day, I decided enough was enough and blocked him, as I wasn't feeling safe at all. Later that year, we received a police notice calling for witnesses because they arrested a few perverts in the area I was schooling in, as there were multiple girls' secondary schools and tertiary education institutions in that area. In the notice there were several photos, and I saw the very same man, the man who approached me to fill out that survey. I was disgusted. Turns out he would use this survey as a tactic and try to approach female teenagers and take photos with them and harass them with texts later. I was shocked as well. My school was in a reputable neighborhood, and we all assumed that there wouldn't be such creeps, but goodness were we all wrong. I was glad he was caught by the police. To the photo-taking creep, let's not meet again. But I did. After he was arrested, I graduated and started schooling in a tertiary institution in 2017. It's about an hour's drive away from where my secondary school was, and I also moved to the school dormitories nearby. As I was walking home one day, I caught sight of him lurking at a bus stop nearby. Oh boy, I could never forget his face. He looked even more creepy carrying a black bag, holding some papers that looked eerily like survey forms while holding a very old camera phone. How did I ever miss that camera phone when I encountered him last time? I was very scared. How could he be here? Wasn't he arrested last year? Wasn't he stalking me the whole time? I was almost crying and quickly called a friend and walked past him. Once he was out of sight, I ran home while on the phone. I was telling all of my schoolmates to be careful, and soon enough the school was informed. The discipline master and a few PE teachers went to apprehend the stalker, and sometime later dragged him into the school office and contacted authorities. I was informed that he was released last year because of insufficient evidence. Apparently in the place where I lived, taking photos of girls/women was not a crime. They searched his flat, and there wasn't anything incriminating other than a creepy ton of photos of female students. After this incident, he disappeared, only to be stalking other girls in another school. How I wished we would never meet again, but I still saw him roaming near my school dorm every now and then, trying to be discreet with his little camera phone. I'm moving to university soon, and would be pretty far away from him. However, I'm not sure if I will ever be free of this stalker. All that I know is that I never want him to meet again. Also, as a final note, I went to check the news and he did get arrested. The news was dated March 2019 because they'd gotten new reports in 2017. So yeah, the 1.5 year processing time is just super long, but I'm glad now there will be justice for this creep. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. If you did, don't forget to let me know by dropping a like and leaving a comment. That always really helps me out. Something else that you can do is send me your stories via email or share them to my Reddit page. All the info can be found in the description. As I mentioned yesterday, it would really mean a lot to me if you would check out my friend Briefcase. He is so close to hitting the 100k goal and is an awesome creator. I'm going to link one of his videos here on screen soon and in the description because he really is worth your time. So please, please, please check him out. But with that being said, I'm going to leave you here. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.